My name is Chris Bailey. Welcome to Shed Talks Recovery. I'm a man in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that I've been able to resolve my problematic relationship with drugs and alcohol, and sustain that since August 7th of 1997. I'm developing this channel with the drive to contact individuals that are recovery curious, for those that are in recovery, or those that may have family members that are in recovery. I'm a certified recovery support specialist, and I've done a lot of program development and co-chair work at the state and national levels. Um, I'm a qualified peer supervisor and a subject matter expert, not just on addiction, but on recovery. And my hope is to develop this channel in attracting a tribe of individuals that are looking at trying to manage and develop not only their own recovery, but to help others in their recovery. And I hope that you choose to join me for further Shed Talks. This is the Shed. This is where we'll recover. But please smash the like button and subscribe. And make sure to let me know in the comments below if you're interested. I really want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Hey, welcome to Shed Talks Recovery. And in this installment, we're going to continue our discussion about the hell inside of us. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't and you missed the first video, you can click the card. It'll take you back to that video. You can find the playlist on my channel, and it'll take you all the way through. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well. So we're discussing and analyzing Kenneth Leong's The Zen Teachings of Jesus. And without giving a prelude about this, I just want to give a caveat that this is not a discussion about any one particular religion. It's about developing an understanding of some spiritual tools that we can take in to a moment of our lived life and recovery, and flip the script on that moment, how we can step out of hellish moments. So in the previous installment, we were delivered the first key out, which is that hell is in the here and now. If we take these teachings of Jesus seriously, then we understand that hell is in the here and now. And you may have heard that in a previous quote, which is, and I forget who said it now, but hell is something we carry around with us. I believe it was Nietzsche that said that. So the second secret and the second key out of a hellish moment is really an understanding that hell, in contrary to popular opinion, is not a place of perpetual suffering. That's not what it is. The notion of an everlasting hell is a really terrible concept. And the Christian theologian C.S. Lewis actually points this out. And he says that the doctrine that we have commonly received around hell is one of the chief grounds on which Christianity as a religion is attacked, as being barbarous, and the goodness of God is impugned. That God's all-loving, all-powerful nature is really impugned by this description of hell. And it's really important to say that the notion of the concept of like a permanent hell really is incompatible with the message that's received inside of Christianity about God's love and God's grace. And C.S. Lewis really points out that this is a blasphemous statement. And his tale of hell really indicates that hell is a place with open doors, that people are free to walk out, but it's locked from the inside. It is locked from the inside. It's a place that we choose to walk into, and we choose not to leave. And if we take that position and we look at it from the standpoint of what life was like for us in addiction, or for those of us that are actually living in addiction, this makes a whole lot of sense to us. Continuing to use is being locked up inside of a habit. It's not a choice. It becomes a choice to walk back into it when we enter into recovery. But it really boils down to this idea that we know that the door is open, that we can leave it, Some of us just don't think that we can. We can let go of it. Some of us feel like we need to be there, and others feel like we don't want to go. We don't want to leave. And so this is the whole reality of the literary description of what C.S. Lewis posits when he says that hell is a place that's locked from the inside. M. Scott Peck, who wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled, it was very popular in the latter part of the 60s, has a particularly interesting quote about this. And he says that the vision of hell, he says, is distinctly like that of C.S. Lewis. The gates of hell are wide open, he says. People can walk out of hell, and the reason they are in hell is that they choose not to. I simply cannot accept the view of hell in which God punishes people without hope and destroys souls without a chance of redemption. She or he wouldn't go to the trouble of creating souls with all their complexity just to fry them in the end. The difficulty here is that while in our addiction, we're presented with a choice, right? We know that there's a choice. But the fear and the fear of the pain of changing does not outweigh the pain of staying the same. In other words, we're unable to say that me staying the same is far more painful than the fear of me changing or walking out of this or trying to find some help for my addiction. The other component for this is that it's really, in some sense, not about a choice. There is a compulsion and an obsession to use. And all the while, there's this kind of concept in our mind that I just can't do this anymore. I can't count the number of times that I woke up in the morning and looked in the mirror and was like, I'm not going to use today. I'm brushing my teeth and I'm saying, I'm not going to use today. I'm getting in the car and I'm saying, I'm not going to use today. I'm driving by the dope man's house saying, well, I'm not going to use. I'm just going to go by and see what everybody's up to. Walking up to the door, I'm not going to use today. I'm knocking on the door. I'm not going to use today. The dope man opens the door and my first statement to them is, are you holding? You got anything? The process for us really boils down to being caught not just in habit, but in our inability to turn down the noise of our addiction to hear that signal that there's a different way to live and a way to get out, and then making the moves to do that, actually taking the steps to do that. In order for me to change my mind as a person that has an addiction issue, I have to move a muscle to change a thought. I have to move a muscle to change a thought. So Jesus actually in the book teaches, right? In the Bible, and something that Leong points out is that Jesus talks about eternal life a whole lot, but he never mentions eternal death. That's not something he mentions. It seems that the myth of this kind of perpetual or permanent hell is really the fault of like a poetic license, but it's also a vengeful mindset. And we see it a lot in people when they talk about addicts. They tend to portray us as being bad people that can't be good or trying to be good, rather than sick people that probably ought to work on getting well or are getting well, right? Like they don't posit us in that capacity. They don't see us in that capacity. It's always on these moral lines. Well, you chose to pick up and use. No addict goes out there using their first time thinking that they're going to become an addict. Like when I was a kid and the teacher would go around the room and ask people what they wanted to be when they grow up. And they go to little Nancy and Nancy says, I want to be a nurse. And they go to little Billy and Billy says, I want to be a doctor. And they go to little Nathan and Nathan says, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up. And then the teacher comes to me and I say, I want to be a junkie when I grow up. That's not what I thought. That's not what I thought. You know, it's not how anybody thinks. The idea is crucial, I think, in a lot of ways, because there's a difference between the idea of what Leong creates in this book about the difference between eternity and perpetuity or perpetuity, the eternal and the perpetual. And eternity is the disappearance of psychological time. In the previous video, I talked about the idea of living in a eternal moment, that you're in flow, like when you were a kid and you go out and play with your friends and you leave it like in the morning, you're drinking out of hoses, and you're eating sandwiches in the backyard, and then you're having like dirt clod wars, and you're doing all this stuff, and before you know it, the street light comes on. The whole day's passed and you didn't even notice it. That's living in an eternal moment, in an eternal now. It's living in a flow state. The perpetual is a little bit different. That is an indefinite extension of time. And that goes back to the example I used in the previous video of our lives lived when we're on a Jones. We're out there looking for a lick and it's dry out there and we can't pick up anything. We're calling the dope man. And we think we're ringing his house like 5 times in an hour, when in reality, I've called him 5 times in 10 minutes, because every single minute seems to stretch into an hour. Paul Tillich, the theologian, makes a very similar observation. He says it's necessary to distinguish between the eternal and the perpetual. Eternity is a quality of living in a paradisical moment, in a moment where the moment is paradise. And it can't be attributed to a being which is condemned and separated from that divine life. It's in that flow state. We're moving in that flow state. And time just seems to dissipate. We're not really concerned with its passage. Where that divine love ends, Tillich says, condemnation can only mean that the creature's left to being a non-being. In the non-being, it's chosen. And so while we're agonizing in these moments, it's almost as if like we are in this endless cycle of pain and we just can't get out of it. It's not temporal, it's an experience. So it's contradictory to nature, it's contradictory to living. So the crux of the problem, the fulcrum of that problem, according to Leong, sits on this notion of eternity being stretched out, that time is just stretched out. An hour lasts forever, a day lasts forever. We're unable to escape it. And it goes back to that relationship that we have, that I discussed in that previous video, between our relationship to pain, the pain of a lived life, and then suffering as a cause of that pain. That those two things are distinct, that we enter into suffering, we walk into that hellish moment. So Lewis also goes on into how hell is structured, which is kind of interesting. Lewis says that the lost soul, quote unquote, is eternally fixed in its diabolical attitude. But whether this eternal fixity implies endless duration or duration at all, we cannot say. So it's everything outside of the kingdom, right, is existing in this elongated time, outside of this ability to move into a different mindset, into a different approach to our life and our reality and what we're going through. And it's making that choice, that conscious choice to move into that. Everything inside that kingdom exists in an ever-present moment, but that ever-present moment just flows. You move through it. So if hell is outside the kingdom, it's logical to conclude that it too exists in the eternal now, but you're just so conscious of being trapped in it rather than freed by it. And that's a key distinction here. So that's a discussion around that second key, that of getting out of hell, a hellish moment, of escaping the hell that we carry around inside of us. Now, how does that apply to, say, the recovery curious? For those of you that are recovery curious, that are still actively using, you all have experienced this. You may be going through it right now. For those of us that are in recovery, that idea of a hellish moment doesn't just go away for us. We still have to deal with our addiction, right? Like the drugs and alcohol were a solution to the problem until it stopped being a solution to the problem. So I still have to deal with the addictive mindset, the way that I have trained myself to feel and move in the world, the way I've trained myself to perceive and how to think about those perceptions. And so it really takes, in a lot of ways, um, moving a muscle to change a thought. For some of us, this might mean like starting the day out with some movement, exercises. It's something I'm really deficient in right now. And I can see a difference between when I used to work out and I used to do all these things versus where I am now. What the difference in my mindset is, it's harder for me to pull myself out of that hellish moment, those painful moments. Um, on the other end of the spectrum, it may mean that I have to sit in some contemplation in the morning. I may need to sit down and really think about locating my feelings, finding out what I'm feeling, ascribing a name to it, a shape, a colors, a temperature, even, and then finding out what it's trying to teach me, and then what do I need in order to handle this pain. On the other end of the spectrum, it's also not attaching to that pleasure. It's not grabbing onto those pleasurable moments that we experience and wanting them to last forever. It's having the grace and the acceptance and the surrender to the moment to allow those things to dissipate and go. For us, to a large degree in recovery, it really boils down to two things: acceptance and surrender to the moment, surrendering to that flow. On the other end of the spectrum, all the way for families that are experiencing this, a person in the family that is experiencing addiction necessarily affects the family. So, how do you create a moment in time where you are not trying to fix another person's problem? Maybe you're able to have a discussion around that problem, but there are things in your day that demand your attention. There are things in your life that demand your attention. And what if, rather than seeing those things as a prevention of you paying attention to this other person and trying to control or motivate this person to change, that you're able to focus on those things, and instead of meeting them as obligations, you're meeting them as opportunities in your life, that you are able to decide to move in to a moment of grace and flow, to accept the fact that this person is where they are, that they don't have to change in the moment, that this problem's not going to be solved overnight. You love them. Your heart may be open to them. Your doors might be closed to them, but you do not have the ability to control what they do. The only thing you can do is focus on what is calling your attention in your life, right? So, with that, what I'm going to encourage you to do is stay grounded, get into flow state, and recover. Again, this is Shed Talks Recovery. Thanks for joining me today. And again, if you missed the previous video, tap the card and don't forget to subscribe. Like and subscribe. Thanks. I'm Chris Bailey.